So thank you everyone for coming to the first of our series of lectures, The Art of Relationships, focusing on individual artists represented in creative exchanges, the exhibition currently on view at the Pollock Krasner House. I want to thank Victoria Pilato, the Stony Brook University Digital Projects Librarian, for co-hosting this series. Unfortunately, she couldn't be with us today, but she helped make it possible, as did the generous gift from Dorothy Lichtenstein and Stony Brook's John H. Marburger III Memorial Fund. Creative Exchanges, the show that we have on now through July 30th, comprises works by artists listed in Pollock and Krasner's address books, who were especially important to them. None more so than Philip Guston, who was a high school buddy of Pollock's and stayed close to Krasner after Pollock's death. And no one is more suited to discussing Guston's life and legacy than Harry Cooper, senior curator and head of modern art at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and one of the organizers of the NGA's current exhibition, Philip Guston Now. He will walk us through the exhibition and address some of the issues it raises, after which we'll open the floor to questions and comments. You may also put your questions and comments in the chat. Please stay muted during Harry's talk, unless he asks for comments, which he indicated that he might do, in which case you may unmute. Before joining the NGA in 2008, Harry served for 10 years as the curator of modern art at the Harvard University Art Museums. He lectured in Harvard's Art History Department on a wide variety of topics, from Cézanne to abstract expressionism. He has also taught at Johns Hopkins and Columbia, and has published numerous articles, book reviews, and criticism. Among the many exhibitions he has organized at the NGA, he initiated the In the Tower series, highlighting such artists as Guston, Mark Rothko, and Nam June Paik, and led the reinstallation of the East Building galleries for their reopening in September of 2016. Harry received his PhD from Harvard University. He has an MA from Johns Hopkins and an AB in American History and Literature from Harvard. He also holds a certificate in drawing and painting from the Corcoran Museum School of Art in Washington, D.C., sadly now defunct. But Harry was there, and he got that practical training that is so valuable for art historians and curators. So now I'm going to turn it over to Harry.
Thank you, Helen. Great to be here, everybody. I see familiar names and faces, some artists and art historians and National Gallery folks, and some unfamiliar ones too. So I hope we get to know each other. The Corcoran School is still going under the auspices of George Washington University, but the gallery is not. So we'll see how the school does. Anyway, as Helen mentioned, I thought I would maybe have some moments of interaction. I think the group is not too large for that, but we'll just we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see that, the entrance to the Guston retrospective at the National Gallery. And one of the things I want to do, and I think I promised to do, was to sort of walk through the show with everybody and through Guston's career, and pausing on some paintings in detail, because I know we have people here who know how to look, and I wanted to look with you. But first, I thought I would just remind us all about the Guston Pollock connection. There they are at about the same time, both pretty well-known portraits of Pollock from an anonymous, I guess, photo studio. And you know what? That was a Freudian slip. I identify Guston there on the right as Jackson Pollock as well. That's Guston on the right, in a photo by Edward Weston, a very handsome photo from 1930. So Guston, born in 1913, and he and Pollock went to the same high school. Well, for a couple of years anyway, and that's Manual Arts High School in Los Angeles, which still exists. Pollock had, I think, just moved to LA in 1928, and it was that fall that he and Guston met at high school, about age 15. For Guston, I guess he maybe had skipped a grade, or that, which wasn't uncommon then, a little bit advanced. And this is Manual Arts High School in 1930, and then below in a postcard from 1928. Sprawling building. It was apparently one of only 3 high schools in Los Angeles. Los Angeles was a small place, and it had not had its boom yet. Founded in 1910, this high school, and then destroyed in the 1933 earthquake. But this is the original building where Guston and Pollock met, and they shared an art teacher named Frederick John de Saint Vrain Schwankowski. And you can see an example of his work on the right from a few years earlier, Lotus, key of F. And I think the Lotus is partly there because he was a theosophist. He was a spiritualist. He had the kids reading Madame Blavatsky, and the lotus flower is important in theosophy, but also introduced them to Cubism, to modern art, as well as Krishnamurti, and it was unusual, and I think it left a big impression on both of them. Let's see if I can advance here. So, among other things, they went with Schwankowski to see Orozco painting the mural Prometheus at Pomona College, and Siqueiros was also in and around LA at the time, and so Mexican muralism became very important for both of them. And just to do a little more of this story, which gets amusing. In the following year, they both got into trouble together at high school. First, for giving some money to a couple of girls who wanted to run away from home, and then for a pamphlet or a broadside they wrote criticizing the principle of emphasizing sports at the expense of the arts. The pamphlet was called "Shall the Tail Wag the Dog?" They were expelled, and there's differing accounts, but we did research for the exhibition, and we believe that Pollock did not go back, but Guston did go back to finish high school. So they then, Pollock went to New York, and it was Pollock who really encouraged Guston to move to New York in the fall of 1936. Guston joined Pollock in New York, stayed with him for a while, and in 1938, we see Pollock's signature on Guston's application to become a citizen, a naturalized citizen. He was born in Montreal. His parents were immigrants, Jewish immigrants from the Ukraine, fleeing pogroms, fleeing conscription in the Tsar's army, and Guston, born Philip Goldstein, became a U.S. citizen in 1938. He had changed his name by that point to Philip Guston a couple years earlier. As many Jewish artists, many Jewish people, of course, did. Marcus Rothkowitz, among others. So that's a whole other subject. Guston later said he regretted the name change. He didn't change it back. And he had married in 1935 a non-Jewish girl named Yuza McKim. So I'm sure there were various reasons for the change. And anyway, I'll get back to the Pollock story. But for now, on to Guston and the show. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to get to Washington, but it's on until August 27th. Very nice long run. And here's both the entrance and the exit. It's a kind of a loop. So you can see through the exit there on the left, his late painting The Street from the Met from the late 1970s. And we also begin with a painting from 1973, Painter's Table there in the center. And there's a photograph of Guston on the right in his New York studio around 1960, Chelsea, Manhattan studio. So I like to start with this painting, which just happens to be one of my favorites, Painter's Table, which is a partial and promised gift to the gallery from Vera and the late Donald Blinken. And I think I'd like to open it up and see if that works, and just ask what people see here. What is the inventory of things on the table? And you can raise your hand. I think Helen will recognize you, and yeah, let's give it a try.
Of course, I see something that's not on the table that I know is very significant, and that is the light bulb. So you might tell us a little bit about why the light bulb was such a talisman for him.
Yes, thank you. It's just above the table, center left, a light bulb with a chain, a golden chain, a pull cord. And the light bulb became important for him after his father died by suicide, by hanging. Guston was all of 10 years old. And Guston says that he found the body and had to deal with it. So you can imagine that that trauma, something he rarely talked about, just occasionally to a couple of friends. And he retreated into a closet to read and to draw, to teach himself how to draw. And that closet had a single bare light bulb. And you can see in this light bulb, it has a little nipple at the bottom, which is an indication of an old-fashioned light bulb. So even in 1973 here, he's using a 1920s light bulb. And as with many things in Guston, a light bulb is not just a light bulb. What else does it look like to anybody?
Well, it looks a bit like a noose.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's partly that, he hasn't indicated any of the surface of the bulb. Really, it's empty. It could be an empty loop. And the setting of the bulb up there at the top, also helps out with that reading. And then just to the left of that, something else that hangs.
Oh, the window shade.
Window shade, a green window shade with a one of those pull cords where you snap it, pull it down, snap it up, looking out onto darkness. So, and again, suggestion of hanging of a noose, often anything suspended from the top of the painting has that association. Not that Guston ever said, A equals B here. But okay, thank you, Helen, for getting us that bit of the biography, important bit. And on the table itself, one thing I like to ask, because I've learned that not everyone knows what this is. Obviously, it is an eyeball, And what is that eyeball resting on? What is that pink rectangle? I know Helen knows, but anyone else want to jump in?
Hey, if I could just say something too, I wrote a paper about Guston in college. So I learned a lot just from reading about his ideas of symbolism. So as he would paint and his memories would just flood into his mind, he would just paint all sorts of symbols. And I've got some ideas of what each thing means, but I just know that so many of the things that he has here pictures of are memories and things that are very important and significant to him, especially in those years when he was kind of forced into being an abstract expressionist because he didn't want to be so obviously against or political. So he kind of hid his symbolism in his images. So if I could just say that.
Thank you. I think that's right. There's a lot that's hidden or not obvious. I wouldn't even use the word symbolism because I think that these are objects that have meanings, but it's rarely a sort of allegory or a kind of lexicon of one thing that means another. Does anyone want to take a crack at my question though about the pink rectangle?
It's
Jeffrey Sanderson.
It's a canvas, right? Stretch canvas.
Yes, the painter knows. It's a canvas. And how do you know that?
By painting, I guess.
Yeah, but what details tell you it's
Oh,
a
I'm
canvas?
sorry. It's the nails on the side of the chassis there, the line of dots.
Yeah, exactly. That's the so-called tacking margin. At least in the old days, you would stretch your canvas around the stretcher strainer and tack it with nails, and you can even see the corners where just like making a bed, you have to deal with the corners and sort of fold them over. So we've got the eyeball on the canvas, which is a wonderful, unusual motif for Guston of the painting that is looking at us, maybe. And most of the other things are pretty obvious. He collected and kept nearby, right near his paintings table, these antique irons, the flat irons, and also the two railroad spikes that you see there. He is a chain smoker. You see the cigarette butts at lower right, and the wonderful detail of the cigarette burning, smoking, sort of adds a wonderful element of time passing. Shoes, books on the left, which are unusual looking books. Sometimes they look more like tablets, maybe tablets of the law. It's hard to read them. They're just markings. And yeah, and the shoes, which figure a lot in Guston's work, often kind of clunky boots. Here they're more realistic shoes. I think maybe the kind of shoes that he might have worn, in fact. So in a way, we see Guston here. He's absent but present in his some of his attributes and some of his equipment. Oh, and what about right under the shoes? Anybody?
The palette, right? That it
Yeah.
has all the colors in the painting.
Right, blobs of color, which it might be a chunk of marble. I'm not. It's funny because his palette at this point was a big glass palette, but that seems to be possibly a chunk of marble palette. So we'll see many of these items coming back as we go through the show. So I just wanted to show you this comparison, which I love because we all have physical habits that we never lose. So a certain way of crossing the arms here. 50 years pass and some things don't change, and there's a lot of continuity in Guston's work. There's certainly changes of style, radical changes of style, but he often pointed to the continuities in his work as well. I think the one thing, the reason his hands are crossed a little bit differently is that when he was 10 years old, he didn't have to hold a cigarette in one hand. Hadn't started smoking yet. He didn't do a lot of self-portraits, but we have 3 at the beginning of the show from different periods. The early one from the early 40s in the center, where you see him in his expressionist, maybe a little Max Beckmann mode there. And behind him, you can maybe just make out a sort of frame, which seems to be a stretcher, an empty stretcher behind him. So he loves to paint about painting and paint the materials around him. And then an unusual 2/3 of a head portrait, I guess you could say, from the late 60s, and then a drawing from a little bit later. This was his family back in Los Angeles, probably right after or right before his father's death. Guston's on the left, his mother Rose in the center, who was really the rock of the family. Nat, an older brother at the top, who tragically died a few years later. His legs were run over by his own car when he walked behind it, not having set the brake. Another tragedy that Guston rarely talked about, but he was very, very close to that brother, and then 2 other siblings. So the very first works chronologically in the show, both near the beginning of the show, not entirely sure of the dates, but we think 1930 or early 1930s, when he is only about 17 years old. A mother and child on the left, which remained in the family, and will be going to the Metropolitan Museum along with many other works that Musa, the daughter, and Musa was also the name of the wife, so a little confusing, but Musa, the daughter, is giving to the Metropolitan Museum, one of Guston's favorite museums, of course. And then on the right, the drawing for Conspirators from the Whitney Museum, which has been something of a flashpoint. It's certainly a disturbing subject, and as you may know, the exhibition was postponed for a couple of years, partly because of concerns that on the part of the directors about his obsession with the Klan, and whether that would be upsetting for people. And no doubt it is, and it would have been very upsetting in the summer of 2020, when the show was going to happen, which became the summer of George Floyd's murder, the height of the Black Lives Matter movement. So the drawing is in the exhibition. Nothing was withdrawn or censored from the checklist, but it is tucked around the corner a little bit, and given a context and extra text and interpretation. So it's an amazing drawing, I think, a fundamental drawing for him. And it's one that led to various paintings, as I'll show you in a moment. But first, the mother and child, pretty amazing, right? Pretty amazing in its technique and in its assimilation of lots of sources. Of course, Renaissance sources, the theme of mother and child, not quite a Madonna and child. Here are a few of them. The hilarious Max Ernst painting, The Virgin Spanking the Christ Child, at upper left, which is a direct source, as you can see in that architecture and behind. De Chirico was a huge influence. Guston said he was the first artist that he really loved and that inspired him to paint. And there was a collection, the Walter and Louise Ahrensberg collection nearby outside Los Angeles. Schwankowski took Guston and Pollock over there, and that was very important. This painting was there. And of course, Picasso's neoclassical nudes, those chunky bathers, perhaps Leger, really remarkable. So he's seeing most of this stuff in reproduction. He's getting the Dial magazine, which is bringing news of modernism and poetry, and whether it's T.S. Eliot or Picasso, to both Pollock and Guston, who reportedly sort of competed to get the latest issues. Back to the drawing for conspirators, and I think you've probably noticed already that the pose is very similar, and I'll just go back for a minute, the almost a simple reflection between the two poses, and the hands, you can see, are especially similar, in one case holding the baby, in the other case holding the rope. I suggest in the catalog that this may be a kind of pair of parents. Certainly we have a mother on the left. Do we have a father on the right? Well, the identity is masked, but I think there is a play of identities and masking throughout Guston, and here, given this uncanny coincidence of the hanging, that is his father's suicide, and the lynching that was going on throughout the South, and also in California. So yes, on the surface, it's a Klansman in the foreground with a rope, a Klan rally in the middle ground, a lynched Black figure in the background, compared to a kind of surreal crucifixion. But if we think about, the father had to get a rope, and so behind that hood, there's maybe a suggestion of that, no doubt unconscious. Also a suggestion of Guston himself, who had to, by his report, deal with the situation.
Now there's a question there's a comment in the chat from Melissa. Do you see the blocks at the base of the drawing, the shaped rectangular cutouts there, as possibly Alabama and Mississippi, like the shapes of the states?
I never saw that myself, but that is in the literature. That I forget who suggested that, but so you're in good company there with that idea. I saw them or see them as pieces of a puzzle, maybe, that can't fit together, and as maybe a kind of standing for this psychic trouble, really, kind of trauma that one cannot get past. But I like that idea. The wall is beautifully done, and worth noticing too. And I think it's interesting that the only color is in the wall and the pavement and the sort of turrets on top, as if those are the things with life in the scene. The life is sort of migrated into inanimate objects in an uncanny way, and there's a confusion of animate and inanimate. If you think of those blocks, I can use my cursor, I guess, up here with these spheres, perhaps as watchers, sentinels, perhaps surrogates for us watching the scene. I'm going really slowly because these are so rich, but move on a little bit to just to show how this drawing became source material for Guston, both for a painting now lost called Conspirators on the left, and you can see that that's essentially a kind of borrowing from the middle ground of the drawing, that group. And then on the right, a fresco he did for the John Reed Club, a fairly recent network of communist clubs throughout the country that were agitating for civil rights and for labor rights. And Guston was very sympathetic, if not a card-carrying communist. And he made this mural, and along with other murals by his friends. And here we see a newspaper clipping showing that his mural on the right was destroyed by the so-called Red Squad of the Los Angeles Police Department, Klan sympathizers, Klan infiltrated, anti-communist, and so they were out to put down this kind of activity, this kind of political art. And Guston remembered forever this this evidence that the state is powerful and not on the side of justice. So we're still in the first room, and I just wanted to show you this pair of paintings, which are not often seen. Again, they stayed in the estate, and showing his command of modeling and the figure, but also his interest in surrealism. And we see, in both cases, we see another stretched canvas. On the left, it's this yellow rectangle here with tacking margin there. I love this female shadow cast onto it. 1935, he's just getting married, and this an unusually sweet moment for Guston. We see this pelvic bone that is suspended here and casting a shadow in the form of a butterfly with a cutout heart in the middle of it. And yet we also have the light bulb here with all of its associations. I've skipped over the large photograph we have of the mural that he did with friends at the behest of Siqueiros in Morelia, Mexico. But I know Ellen Lando's on the call, and Ellen has written beautifully about that project. But moving ahead a couple of years, as I said, he got to New York in fall of 36, and one of the first paintings he makes there is Bombardment, which is really his Guernica, his response to the bombing of the Spanish town. He had no doubt seen Picasso's, whether in person or reproduction. Siqueiros also painted a response, Echo of a Scream, which is at MoMA. And here, very unusual painting, this Tondo, so a Renaissance format, a lot of muralist rhetoric here, both Mexican, I would say, and Thomas Hart Benton in that male figure at the bottom left. But I think what's really remarkable about it is using that format to create this single point perspective, and even more than single point, it just it warps everything. It turns everything into a kind of convex surface, even the bricks at the left, and it's a very powerful way of focusing us on that explosion, drawing us in, throwing us out, along with those figures. Philadelphia Museum of Art. Guston reportedly rolled this along the street to get it from his studio to an exhibition in support of the Republican forces, Spanish Republican forces, and it survived. Apparently, it has a kind of metal hoop frame around it. So we know that Guston spent much of the 40s in the Midwest. He found work teaching art, first at Iowa State in Iowa City, and for a few years, and then at WashU in St. Louis. And this painting is sort of the culmination of the Iowa period. He spent a year on it, and we see the Iowa City skyline, and we see his daughter. He and his wife have had their child, Musa, here in the middle, one of the few figures that is not masked or deep in shadow. This is recently cleaned, and when you see it in person, there's all kinds of wonderful things that were hard to see before, especially along the bottom. There's that light bulb on sort of dead light bulb being held by this figure with the horn and the striped pajamas, who almost certainly references the victims of the Holocaust at this point. Photographs and films of the liberation of the camps have made their way to the US and to Guston. And many other things going on here. A boy on the right in a Harlequin outfit, one of Picasso's favorite costumes. There's along the bottom a tipped over candlestick and newspaper, which seems to carry some images of burned faces. And I think one thing this really indicates is that Guston was interested in masking in headgear in a general way. Not the Klan was not just the Klan, but it was part of his interest in maybe the whole problem of seeing or not seeing, and maybe not wanting to see or not wanting to be seen. And there's all kinds of ways that plays out here, as you can see. I'm going to keep on going, but please feel free to raise a hand, and Helen can tell me somebody has a comment or a question. Okay. So there is the painting in the exhibition. It's in our concourse lower level east building. Beautiful galleries, 14-foot ceilings, ample space for these works. And just moving around that gallery a little bit, we see on the right, porch 2, 1947, from this St. Louis period, where he's continuing with these themes of children, children playing and masking and being masked, playing instruments, and the Holocaust references become clearer because in St. Louis, he saw the exhibition Lest We Forget, which the newspaper man Joseph Pulitzer mounted with films and photographs that he had acquired in his fact-finding mission to Germany to see the liberation. So a very fraught set of paintings. He destroyed many of them, but he was happy with a couple, which we have in the show. And one thing that happens at this point, speaking of Pollock, is that in 1945, while he's still in the Midwest, he has a show at the Midtown Gallery in New York, and Pollock and Guston goes to the opening, and Pollock reportedly, in a somewhat drunken mood, says or declares that, "God damn it, I won't stand for the way you're painting. I won't stand for it." Which I think must have left an impression on Guston. And remember, Guston's in the Midwest, and he's missing everything that's going on in New York, and the whole early development of abstract expressionism out of surrealism and other sources. And he's been doing this figure painting, which is often sort of romantic, sort of moody, soft, symbolist, and Beckmann influenced Venetian, and Pollock won't stand for it. He regards it as regressive, and maybe partly because of that, but also I think because Guston is feeling that those paintings aren't carrying all the meanings that he's placing on them, and perhaps no figurative painting could. And so on the left there we see 3 paintings from 47 to 49, in which he gradually moves toward abstraction. And it's great to see those paintings together. The Tormentors on the left, from San Francisco Museum Modern Art Review in the middle from the National Gallery, and Red Painting on the right from the Museum of Modern Art. And I don't think we're going to look closely at those, but the Tormentors, you see tracery of his figurative elements, boots, hoods, horseshoes, musical instruments, which gradually get sort of swamped by this rising tide of cadmium red, which becomes Guston's go-to color. So he gets a Rome Prize, and he's thrilled to see his heroes of Italian art Piero, Uccello, many, Giotto, many others in the flesh in 1949, and then he gets back to New York. And what happens there is a great change. And it starts with this painting, white painting of 1951, where he said that he forced himself not to step back, not to exert judgment, even just to be in the painting, very much in the way, you know, Pollock was talking about being in the painting, although Guston remains much more traditional than Pollock, of course. He never abandons the brush. He doesn't abandon the easel. He's painting vertically. And I want to read you one passage from the collected writings, lectures, and interviews, which talks about this. Let's see. He says, let's see, well, the question from Harold Rosenberg about Pollock not making sketches and just, you know, being in the painting. And Guston says, no, that's too simplified. I think Pollock was essential, that he did what he did. Every painter does what he does, invents his own technique, so to speak, or method. What he claimed might be his rationalization of it. It also indicates his own anti-Renaissance struggle. In a sense, and here we see Guston really trying to make Pollock a little more of a traditional painter, and maybe to tie him a little more closely to Guston himself. He says, Jack came out of late Renaissance painting. I think his early paintings are descendants of El Greco. To speak of spontaneity is too simplified a version. When you study Renaissance painting, you can find anything you want to find. You find blotches and spontaneity and spots, especially in drawings, and you can find preconception and years of preparation for a single canvas. So I just think that's a very interesting reading of Pollock, sort of reading him back into the tradition, which, you know, Guston knew Pollock was part of and knew where Pollock had come from, being early friends. And in fact, this painting has a lot to do with Mondrian and Morandi and many other painters that Guston was looking at, even though he said he was trying not to step back and look at it at all. I've included a healthy representation of the abstract work because I think it's beautiful and very important, and really the time in which Guston discovered maybe not what to paint, but how to paint. And his touch becomes much more fluid, lyrical. You know, those paintings of the 40s are labored and scraped and worked. And these are much more layered and flowing. And yet, by the late 50s, the labor comes back in, I think you could say. This is no longer the kind of painting that the critics were calling abstract impressionist. It's darker, it's more tangled, and we see figures coming back into the picture. If you want to see them, you can see them. I see creatures and flapping birds there in Fable. Fable 2 is not in the exhibition, but he did a lot of at this point a lot of smaller paintings on panel and board, including Fable 2. And he's so farther and farther from his high abstract expressionist period, and that was a period when he was successful, and he'd been successful as a muralist, and he had won prizes, Carnegie International, Rome Prize, and then as an abstract expressionist, represented by Sidney Janis Gallery, along with, you know, Klein and Pollock and Rothko. But he was not satisfied, and he seems every 6 or 7 years to become unsatisfied with his work. Maybe it was too successful. Maybe he didn't trust that. Maybe it was too pretty. Maybe he was having a little bit of the problem that Rothko was having with people wanting his paintings as beautiful decorations for interiors. So, but he also talks about wanting to renew contact with the world, the thickness of things, materiality, and strokes congeal into forms and into heads. He starts to refer to these as heads. This one, Mirror to SK, referring to Soren Kierkegaard. Guston was reading existentialism along with many other painters and poets at this moment. And the heads become more pronounced. Paintings become simpler, painting very fast, wet in wet, painting not stretched but tacked up, the canvas tacked to a sort of painting wall, and their paintings are pouring out of him, showing them in a couple of museums, and not to great success, Guggenheim, Jewish Museum, and then really reaches a roadblock with that painting on the left from 1965 at the Tate, and takes a break as he tends to, and turns to drawing and moves away from painting for a couple of years. So one of my favorite parts of his career and the exhibition, looking at these drawings, two campaigns. First on the left from 66, 67, and then on the right, 67 to 68. The ones on the left are ink and brush. The ones on the right are mostly charcoal. They're very, very different, moving from the sort of threshold of abstraction on the left into objects, returning to simple objects. The light bulb, the book, the shoe. There's an inkwell there. Here's a view of this whole gallery. The drawings are sort of tucked around to on that wall. You can't quite see, but the point is to see this spiraling of his work into a kind of black hole, maybe, and then he works his way out of it through drawing. And between those two sets of drawings, he decides that it's the object drawings, as he calls them, the ones on the right, the charcoal drawings, and not the pure drawings, which will be his next move. And this is summer of 68. He's in Woodstock, New York. He's left the city. He's sort of in his retreat there, and watching the news and watching everything that's happening in the country, and the riots, assassinations, protests, summer of 68, Democratic National Convention. And he says that they trigger, he uses the word trigger, a word we hear a lot these days. They triggered a memory for him, especially the broadcast of the police beating up demonstrators in Chicago, and then the trial of the Chicago 7. And the memory is of the Red Squad, the LAPD, beating up his painting, his mural that we saw earlier. And this, I think, fuels the return of the Klan into his work, and the return of cartoons too. I didn't talk much about that, but he was a cartoonist early on, and he becomes a kind of cartoonist again, but a cartoonist in paint, which makes a big difference, not in line, but with big, juicy brush strokes. And maybe most surprising of all is the equation he makes of the Klansman and the artist there on the left. Maybe not that surprising if we think back to that conspirators drawing and the sort of layering of identities that might be going on there. And this work, you can see down the hall many small panels in which he spun out this new vocabulary and made the paintings that he would put together into the large paintings he showed at the Marlborough Gallery in October of 1970. So here are the small panels, which I love. Some of the first Guston paintings I fell in love with when I was working at the Fog. They have two of them, a book and a trio of hoods. Guston
Wow.
called the Klansmen hoods.
Wow.
Is there a comment or a thought? Okay, I'll keep going, but don't hesitate. Um, and then they come together in larger paintings. This one's still medium-sized, but very important painting in which he really declares this interest in the Klansman as an artist. And as Guston said, the question of what it would be like to be evil. So I think of him in part as a kind of novelist. It's a very novelistic question, you know, the idea of trying to think yourself into a very different character. But also we can think about double consciousness and splitting, and that's something certainly something connected to African American experience, but also Jewish experience of any oppressed minority. I sometimes think of the Groucho Marx line, I would not join any club that would take me as a member.
And here's a question from Victoria Monroe.
Yes.
He asked if you could address the color pink and color in general for him.
Sure. I'll just finish my thought, which is that in this painting, he has sort of done the opposite of the Groucho Marx line and joined a club that would not take him as a member. But the pink, yeah, so the cadmium red medium, well, he said cadmium red medium holds the plane. It doesn't advance, it doesn't recede. He liked the way it really stayed on the surface and was very, very strong and positive and concrete. But of course, then he mixes it with white to create this pink. We have one quote on the wall across from these paintings. The wall is painted pink, and we have a quote from Guston where he says, I would take my favorite color, cadmium red medium, and mix it with white and make a mess of pink. And that mess of pink made me want to paint. So that's one answer. Just he loved it, and it was it got him going. He also talked about pink as the Sunday comics color. So if you think back about the colored funnies that would appear on Sunday with that sort of weak color, so he's associating it there. But we can think also, of course, about I mean, so many things, you know. Is it a feminine color? Certainly there's that coating of it, but it's also a color of blood, flesh in some cases, the body, innards, many things. The Red Sea, he paints a lot of red seas. We can see one there. So it's a reduced palette. And Victoria, hello Victoria, nice to hear from you. The palette, he really established this palette back in the 50s, in the early 50s, the red, blue, pink, black, and flashes of green and orange, as we see here. No yellow, no purple, no violet. Very specific palette that he just wanted to, I think, control the equation and just get a lot out of a limited means here. One of my favorites of the Marlborough paintings, so-called. So more than 30 huge paintings were shown at the Marlborough Gallery. We have about over a dozen of them in the show, which is one of the biggest reunions of them. And this one called Courtroom, which will be coming into the National Gallery collection from the Meyerhoff collection. And he talks about the canvas as a courtroom where the artist is jury, judge, and defendant and prosecutor, and something like that. He's read The Trial by Kafka. There's a sense of the absurd here, but I think in this painting, in many paintings, also a clear sense in the narrative that the Klansman is unperturbed and that the arm of the law is ineffectual. And whether the Klansman is in the studio here or riding around town, the Klansman is rarely bothered, which you can almost feel Guston's rage at this, but conveyed in this comic form that I think distances a lot of the feeling and the horror, and maybe makes it palatable, makes it something he can paint. Here, a view just walking out of the gallery where we see the first of the Marlborough paintings, apparently, and I have David McKee's information on this. And David hung the Marlborough show and then went on to become Guston's devoted dealer. Blackboard on the left was the first of them, and then Flatlands on the right, the one Guston painted just before the show opened, where he sort of poured everything out and wanted to include all of his images, from the hoods to clocks. There's the colossal foot of Constantine, one of his favorite places to go and look at ruins in Rome. Bricks from Crazy Cat, his favorite cartoonist being George Harriman, and lots of great stuff in that painting. So I'm going a little long, but if you have to go, thank you for joining me. And if you can stay, hopefully, Helen, we can keep going a little bit. Okay. So we only have a decade to go, but it was a decade in which he was incredibly prolific, more than ever before. And it begins well with his escape from New York to Italy once again. Spends time at the American Academy and other traveling around, getting away from vicious criticism for the most part of the Marlborough show. De Kooning stuck by him, but many did not. They regarded him as having betrayed modern painting, basically, and abstract painting in particular. But when he got back to the States, he's back in Woodstock, where he had moved a few years earlier, and Philip Roth is there, and the two Phillips, about a generation apart in age, but they really connected over Nixon, their hatred for Nixon, their memories of Nixon, the communist witch hunter. Nixon is now making an overture to China, which they really irritated them as the height of hypocrisy. And anyway, it's a great suite of drawings, which are all promised to the National Gallery, I'm glad to say, because Musa, the daughter, wanted them in Washington, partly because of that. And here we see Nixon, his dog Checkers. Guston lets all the humor that is kind of sort of under the surface in the Marlborough paintings comes out here. This is Agnew, Conehead with Frankenstein nails, John Mitchell with his pipe, Henry Kissinger is simply a pair of glasses. And there's 73 of these going through Nixon's life up until the planning of the trip to China. It's before Watergate, but Guston seemed to know that Nixon was going to be really a criminal figure in American history. And then when he gets back to painting, so that was another hiatus, the hoods pretty much give way to a more directly autobiographical figure, this lima bean head, Cyclops, a head with a big eye, staring eye, maybe an eye that has seen too much, worried forehead, chain smoking, no mouth or nose. Kind of, someone suggested it's sort of an infantile image, an image of an infant just with maybe an oral fixation and a visual fixation. And he's looking at the pile of shoes, which carry many associations, thinking about the Holocaust, but comics as well. We see hanging things again that Helen pointed out in the first painting, both the light bulb on the left and the pull cord on the right. There's even a pull cord in the middle there that got sort of detached from whatever, because these are really process paintings in which he's almost free associating on canvas. He then gives the Cyclops head a mate, a figure of his wife here, Musa on the right. This is her hair and forehead, believe it or not. And she's under the covers. She has had a stroke, which upset Guston, and she becomes a figure of suffering for him. And you know, it's not a pretty picture. In many ways. Here we see, this is not in the show, but it shows you how he derives that sort of icon from a somewhat more realistic drawing of her with those beautiful eyelashes just over the covers. A view of the larger room here, and then looking back, and all of these paintings are in some way forms of musa, whether it's the horseshoe on the horizon or a kind of brain, or the couple in bed on the left. And then we turn a corner again and get into a sort of last corridor on the right with some of the black paintings, especially that painting with the hand smoking, one of my favorites, called Talking, where we see Guston doing one of his favorite things, which was talking. And I recommend the book that Clark Coolidge edited of the collected writings, a great source. He's talking, he's smoking, and maybe holding a little paintbrush here. There's the pull cord again, the watch pointing backwards, this billowing red smoke, dark but very cartoony, and there's a lot of wit here. There's a lot of wit. Someone pointed out to me that the hand is in the shape of a gun. The you know, how we make the sign of shooting, and which then becomes a smoking gun. And there's puns, visual and verbal puns everywhere. These little fingers bent, which I think is apt. And I think Guston is not necessarily intending all of this, but he's allowing it to happen and using a vocabulary where, as he said, I start painting one thing and it turns into something else. He collaborated with poets, so he's very aware of puns and wordplay and free association. And this one is one of his collaborations with his wife, who was a wonderful poet, even though she sort of submerged her career to his, but her work is available now in a beautiful volume called Alone with the Moon. And I'm just showing you this one because it does feature the wristwatch in the verse there. And then some of his last works on the left. He's had a couple of heart attacks in the late 70s. He's not painting the big canvases. These are ink and acrylic on board or paper. It just occurred to me looking at the cherries, which is one of my favorites, that it also recalls one of the hoods in the shape and the color. So, you know, there's, I think the tragic and the comic are never far apart in Guston. This is the final room of the show. There's that Met painting on the left that we saw at the beginning. There it is. And just to mention, you know, that the idea of continuity. So this goes back, this street, see the trash, this is basically, it's two of his great leitmotifs coming together, the legs with shoes on the left, the arms with trash can lids on the right. They're doing battle. And so that goes back to a painting like Gladiators from 1940, of course, where we see the battle, the trash can lid as a shield, but also for the palette, his abstract work, and this one is actually called The Street from 1956. And then the show concludes with this trio of paintings that I always wanted to bring together from three different collections, but he didn't do many like this. They're very late. They are at the end of the catalog Resnais, which is a great resource, by the way, online at philipguston.org. And there's a kind of relief here from all the red and pink, although it's certainly mixed in. And he's once again painting what's around him, painting the studio, painting easels and stretchers and make shoes and bricks and making them into kind of monuments. And then I had to end with that painting called called a reverse of the back of the canvas, light bulb and pull cord. Darkness is encroaching on the floor, but it's a beautiful painting. It's a beautiful painting of the back of a painting, which is a painting. So I see it as in many ways a very strong note about painting continuing. And I think that's it. So
Oh, thank you so much, Harry. I mean, this is
sure.
absolutely fascinating. And that last painting that you showed in the middle reminded me of an exhibition at the Whitney Museum many years ago called Art About Art, where the
I
cover
didn't
of
see
the
that.
catalog was a Lichtenstein painting of a stretcher.
Yep.
I think, I mean, Guston's art is all about art, and I think in a very evident way that his looking and assimilating the work of other predecessors, and it's just so incisive. It's not copying, it's not parody. It's just a real assimilation of what he could learn and what was available to him from the artists from the Renaissance to his contemporaries.
I totally agree, and we've had a lot of talk about the issues and the politics, and that's all there because art is also for Guston about that, but it's all filtered through with this incredible self-taught visual literacy.
So anyone who would like to comment and unmute themselves, please feel free to do so. I see a comment in the chat. Incredible. And I echo that too. And I just wish I could get to Washington to see the exhibition. You say it's on through mid-August, is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, Melissa says I loved every minute, and I echo that as well.
Okay.
And interesting, you mentioned Philip Roth, because
Yes.
in our Creative Exchanges exhibition, the Guston Foundation was nice enough to lend us a drawing by Guston showing it was a gift to Philip Roth that came back to the collection, I guess, after Guston's death. And it shows him knifing a critic in the chest.
Yes,
And
that's
so,
great.
because Roth had also had, I think, a drubbing and right at the same time as Guston did. So it was an appropriate gift.
Exactly. It was yes. Let's kill the critics. We agree. Audrey has
Audrey, I know
something to
you
say.
wanted to. Go ahead.
Hi, Helen. Nice to see you. And Harry, thank you so much.
Thank you
Really
for being here.
well, I wouldn't miss it. This is Samantha Baskin, an art historian, friend of mine from Cleveland. Just two things, Harry. One, Tony Jansen, who I was quite friendly with for quite a few years, said when he grew up, he used to hang around at Guston's studio with his father and with Guston, and I think with Musa. And he remembered when he got a terrible, terrible blasting review for his, quote, figurative work. And he was so crushed, depressed. People don't realize that artists take things to heart. But you know that.
Who is Tony Jansen?
Horst Jansen's son.
Okay, I was wondering if there was a connection.
Who
And
took
Horst
over
was the person who brought Guston to Iowa City and turned Iowa City into the Greenwich Village of the Midwest. Yeah.
The other thing is, I don't have it. I wanted to have it for you, but I know someone who actually lives in my building who is related to Eastman, who was de Kooning's lawyer, but also apparently involved with Guston. And she showed me a letter that Guston wrote that just came up that was so heartfelt. It brought me to tears about loving art. I don't know if you know that letter. If you don't, I'll try to get it.
It just came to auction, you mean?
I don't know. It
okay.
just apparently was sent to her.
Okay.
I don't think it's been known.
Yeah, and his letters are wonderful, and they often have great drawings in them too. So thank you, Audrey. I appreciate
Well, your talk
that.
was great. Thank you.
Thank you. And Yeah, and you know, there's more on our website. There's an interview, a video interview with Musa, the daughter, Musa Mayer, and Glenn Ligon and Cecily Brown, all talking about Guston and what they love about the work. So I recommend that too.
Well, thank you again, Harry. I mean, this has been just such amazing insight into Guston's work, and not only just the physical, creative output, but the thinking behind it and some of the symbolism that might, bypass somebody who was looking at it casually, but to really give you a sense of how his personal experience influenced his imagery. So next week, we have Philip Rylance, who will be giving us a lecture about Charles Pollock, Jackson Pollock's oldest brother, who was a significant artist in his own right. And Philip did an exhibition of his work a few years ago in Venice and also in Palm Beach. So I hope you'll come back for that. And thank you all again for coming. And please go to creativeexchanges.org to see the exhibition and the catalog. And my collaborators, Jim Brower and Teresa Davis, have done a wonderful job of co-organizing the show. So please take advantage of that and come by and see the show in person at the Pollockhouse.
And if I could have a last word, I'm just reading through the chat now, and there's such great comments, and thank you for that. And I don't know, Helen, if you can preserve that, I would love to
yeah, I think that goes with the recording.
get a copy of that. Great. And thank
you.
you to my friends for being here and my strangers for being here too. I really was happy to share that.
Thank you again, Harry.
Take care.
Thank you.